All right, well, it looks like it's 2 o'clock, and we're going to get started here with our panelist session. The topic for this afternoon's session is policies in progress in Minnesota and Wisconsin, a comparison of renewable energy in the Gopher and Badger states. And my name is Mike Barnett. I work for HGA Architects and Engineers, and I'm going to be moderating today's panel. Before we get started, I just wanted to highlight one of our sponsors. You know, this summit would not be possible without the generous support of our summit sponsors. And I'd like to thank Eagle Point Solar for sponsoring this session. And Eagle Point Solar, I've actually quite familiar with. They've been quite the leader in Wisconsin in opening new markets and new procurement paths for business owners and commercial facilities to install solar on their properties. So with that, I want to hand it over to Jim Poland from Eagle Point Solar to talk about what you're up to these days.
Hey, thanks, Mike. We certainly appreciate it. I think, like everybody else, we are trying to figure out how to work our way through being in our industry in the world of COVID. Again, like everybody else, I think we were happy to see 2020 behind us and looking forward to 2021. So I think we were fortunate in our industry, to be able to operate at least to some level through 2020. Being designated as an essential business and being able to operate was certainly good. But we're looking forward to a productive 2021. The topic today here is an interesting one. We operate in 3 states, Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin. So we get to see firsthand really, the development of our markets in all 3 of those states. And I think when you look at Wisconsin in particular, I know the comparison is Wisconsin to Minnesota, but I think when you look at Wisconsin in particular, in our opinion, the good news is the base is really being built to grow the industry and keep the industry growing, as opposed to it being a flash in the pan. So, Minnesota has taken some steps, I think maybe that the data will show has put them ahead of Wisconsin, but I believe through the efforts of Renew and really the drive of the industry, our view here is it's really important to build a good solid base and have a good pace of development as opposed to, comparing Illinois here. I know we're not talking about Illinois, but Illinois put a program in place that was designed to be long-term, and now it's proving to fizzle itself out. And what's happening is the consumer is really ending up paying the price. So in Wisconsin, I think, again, I think the good news is through the efforts of Renew and others, we're building a good base. So I think comparing state to state is a good idea. We all need to have a benchmark. I think as long as we understand that each state, number one, has individual goals, and number two, has uniqueness to it, certainly the comparable data, I think, helps us put together programs. But I think each state needs to be looked at, as an independent entity here. And essentially, hopefully in Wisconsin, as things grow, we can build on some of the successes other states have had and not really have some of the pitfalls other states have had. So we certainly appreciate being involved with Renew. It's unfortunate the summit is taking place virtually this year, but there's certainly a lot of information that is, being transferred here, and we're just real happy to be a part of it. So thank you, and interested in hearing the conversation.
Cool, great, thanks, Jim. And if people wanted to reach out to you, do you guys have a way to be reached through the exhibitors booths, through the platform, the web platform, or?
We do. Yep. We actually have a couple of our sales reps who are manning our virtual booth. If not, I believe there's an email address that people can reach out to us, and we'll get back to them, just as quickly as we can. But we do have some hours. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I know some hours that we are manning our virtual booth.
Okay, perfect. All right, thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us, and hopefully we get to work on some projects in the future with you guys. All right, well, with that, we're going to get into our MINNE presentation. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here, so just bear with me. Just an overview of today's discussion. We're going to start out. I have some background slides that I like to share about some of the similarities and differences between Minnesota and Wisconsin. And then we're going to have our panelists present some short material. Then I'll have some questions for our panelists, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. So as we dive into the material, I would encourage you guys to post any questions you may have into the chat box in your Zoom window. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. Our Wisconsin representative is Maria Redmond. Maria is the director of the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, which is a part of the Division of Administration, and that's a new office that was just created about a year ago, and Maria is the inaugural director of that office. Prior to that role, Maria was the director of the Office of Energy Innovation, which is housed in the PSC, and she's been working for the state on energy issues for over 17 years and has considerable experience and extensive knowledge of renewable energy, alternative fuels, biofuels, and advanced technologies. Maria has worked to develop and implement competitive energy programs and services on behalf of the state agencies and businesses, and has extensive knowledge in alternative fuels, biofuels, advanced vehicle technologies, as well as securing and managing federal grant programs. So we're excited to have Maria representing the state of Wisconsin today. Our Minnesota representative is Aditya Ranade. Aditya is the Deputy Commissioner of the Division of Energy Resources at the Minnesota Department of Commerce. He joined the Commerce Department in 2020 and oversees utility rates and planning, conservation improvement programs, energy market transformation, emerging energy technologies, and energy equity programs. Prior to joining the Commerce Department, Aditya founded 2 startups, and before that he led global smart grid R&D at 3M, led building energy efficiency practices at Lux Research, and developed solar panel materials for Saint-Gobain. He has authored reports on topics such as building integrated PV, building energy efficiency policy in G20 countries, and climate adaptation technology. So we're thrilled to have Aditya representing Minnesota. Thanks for joining us, Aditya. So just to set the stage here, I pulled together a few slides. I'm going to just churn through them pretty quick because I really want to get to the panelists and hear what they have to say. But I'm going to go ahead and try this sharing a screen again. There we go. And I just wanted to set the stage here to take a look at how these 2 states compare on the energy front, and let's just jump into it. You know, one thing to keep in mind here, and this is something I was thinking about this morning, but the energy space is moving so quickly, and we are in this energy transition, and it was almost in a way kind of, I don't want to say comical, but putting these slides together and looking in the rearview mirrors, I don't know if it's really that worthwhile of exercise because things are changing so fast. We heard Commissioner Huebner talk to the PSC already approving over a gigawatt of utility solar projects, and another 1,500 or 1.5 gigawatts of solar projects that are in the application phase. So these charts are actually going to be quite outdated quite quickly here, but I think it is worthwhile just to take a moment and look, see where things were in 2008. States have a pretty significant coal generation sources. Natural gas is in second here. And the topic of today is the renewable resources. And you could see that Wisconsin in 2018 had about 4% hydro and then 5% non-hydro, whereas Minnesota was 23% non-hydro. So about 4 or 5 times more renewable resources. And let's dive into that a little bit more. And Aditya is going to follow up on this, so I'm not going to spend too much time, but Minnesota has quite significant wind resources. And Wisconsin is made up of a mix of resources outside Wisconsin, primarily wind, also some wind in Wisconsin, 21%, significant portion of hydro, some biomass, and then a little sliver of solar, which is going to change quite quickly over the coming years. It's probably worth mentioning that Minnesota, especially southern southwest Minnesota, has an excellent wind resource, and could help explain some of the reason that Minnesota got out front on the wind front, but probably not all of it. And I think policy might have something to do with that, and we'll talk more about that later in this session. The solar resource, we're seeing a lot of development on the solar front, and pretty similar resources for solar in Minnesota and Wisconsin. The renewable portfolio standard for a few Midwest states here. I should mention too that some of these figures were pulled from the Energy Law and Policy Center's recent report, Tale of Two States, highlighting the differences in the Wisconsin and Minnesota renewable development scene. So I just highlight that, and thanks ELPC for letting me use some of these figures. Wisconsin's RPS is at 10%. It's been there for a while, and we're meeting that goal. Minnesota has a goal of 25% by 2025, and I believe they're well past that at this point. One more thing I wanted to highlight is just the political situation in the two states. Wisconsin, being energy policy is controlled by the legislature, has been solidly Republican in the state of Wisconsin. It's been more of a mixed bag in Minnesota, but we're not really seeing renewable energy as being a strictly partisan topic these days. I think based on the lower costs, everyone is getting excited about the potential for renewable energy. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Maria to just share some information about what she's up to these days. And I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton over to you. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Sorry I can't see you in person, but I know you're out there.
I don't see
And
the rainbow.
oh, hold on one second. I'm presenting. Okay, sorry, 6-year-old. So I have been in this position for just now a year, and who knew that we'd be facing a pandemic and social unrest and all of these things. So I hope everybody out there is safe and healthy. And on that note, we have been working very hard with the administration over the last year on a number of different items. As everyone is fully aware and probably heard from my bosses this morning, the Lieutenant Governor and the Secretary Joel Brennan, that we are in full force in deploying and organizing and trying to figure out what we're going to do with clean energy here in the state. We do have, through Executive Order 38, our 100% carbon-free electricity consumed goal by 2050. And so I think, there is the next step of that is implementation, and how do we create the pathway to get to that point. We also are members of the U.S. Climate Alliance, and we have committed to carbon reduction goals at the levels of the 2015 Paris Climate Accord, where it's 26% carbon reduction by 2050. I think those goals have been actually updated recently as well. And we've recently launched our clean energy planning process, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, but also making sure that environmental justice, just transition of workforce, training of workforce are all a core part of all of the work that we're doing as well. And thinking about the state that we're in today is not going to be the state that we're in 5 to 10 to 15 years from now. And so what we want to be doing is supporting innovation, research, and business development now, as well as creating a framework for a clean energy planning process that will be flexible, that we can revisit, that we can adjust along the way, so that we're not in a situation. When I look at some of the charts that are brought up with Wisconsin, we're like, you put us in red. I think probably we would have preferred like green or gold or something like that, right? But the study points out that Wisconsin is at 10%, and we've been at that for a long time, and we've never adjusted. That we're now at a point where we need to make adjustments, and we need to be looking at our resources, look at what's happening in the market, and develop a pathway and a plan that gets us to move the needle. Wisconsin's current renewable, you know, I think if you look at the data that we have access to, puts us at like 10%. But I think, like as Mike pointed out, is that if we get up to date with data and we really look at what's being approved, what's in the MISO queue, what's, you know, what all the different projects that are out there that are, you know, moving forward, that we're way beyond that. We're doing really well. It's just the data hasn't caught up with that. And so I think another thing that I get a little heartburn with is that I feel like the world is moving faster than the state is. And so, and there's a lot of different things at play, including politics and the social world around us and things that are happening that have, you know, kind of stalled some of the work. But I think that we have a great opportunity here to create the pathway forward. And that's something that we're working on. We recently launched our clean energy planning process here in the state, and created a advisory team of 30 plus organizations to help advise us on how to move forward. We've developed a list of key strategies for the clean energy plan that helps us look at all of the different options out there and recognize that we don't have to start from scratch. There's some really great examples, including some from Minnesota, that again, we'll talk about later, that we could potentially model off of. And what we want to do is create a plan that the administration can take and either create a legislative package or integrate into the budget, or direct state agencies to start moving forward with helping to facilitate the deployment of renewables here in the state. So we've been working really hard. You know, I would have liked to have had a lot of this work done, you know, prior to the end of last year, but we're chugging away at it and we're really excited to see what comes. You know, I think that we're looking at it at a multi-sector, multifaceted, multi-resource approach. And we're looking at as the clean energy economy can help mitigate the effects of climate change, and looking at it as like a whole big picture. And so we want to look at people, equitable access to clean energy, reducing energy burden, environmental justice, just transition, improving health, looking at the social aspects of clean energy deployment, and making sure that any policy that we develop has to look at each of those variables. So we're not creating a bigger problem or creating a bigger burden on communities already affected by climate and energy injustice. And then we want to look at our environment, the impact on land, air, water, and reducing emissions. And so when we're looking at the policies and we're thinking about analyzing policies, we're looking at which one can move the needle, but which one also has the biggest impact on emissions reductions. And then really important is the economy. We all know that we are net energy importers here in Wisconsin. We're also net money exporters here in the state. So we have a deficit of 14.4, close to $15 billion that we could be looking locally to produce our own energy, keeping the money here in the state, being more efficient, and bringing business to Wisconsin so that we can rely more on ourselves. But that being said, we are a part of a region, and you know, I was on a call with some folks from MISO this morning, and a group of agencies, and talking about, you know, looking at the region as and working collectively, looking at models that are from other states. So that's kind of where we're at. Where, you know, there's definitely more to talk about but I definitely wanted to say that we got our climate task force report is out on the street. We've got a lot of climate solutions in there. We're working on implementation of those solutions. And now we're transitioning into our clean energy planning process and getting that pathway set and syncing those up and creating this path forward. That really a lot of that work will be ready to go mid this year, and that will have some momentum and some definition around what does Wisconsin want to do as it relates to policy and deployment of renewables and clean energy here in the state.
All right, great. Thanks for setting the stage for us on Wisconsin. That was great. Aditya, I'll turn it over to you, and could go ahead and share your slides and tell us a little bit about what's going on in Minnesota.
Yeah, happy to do that. So I represent the Department of Commerce and lead Division of Energy Resources there. And Department of Commerce is the main economic regulator of the electric power sector in Minnesota. So my team helps the administration evaluate and lead legislative proposals, as well as help the Utilities Commission on evaluating integrated resource plans and rates. So I kind of see both sides of that. And there's oftentimes healthy tension between the two, which is always fun. So you pointed out, Mike, that we have had quite a bit of renewable penetration, and that we are a little bit ahead of our target. I wanted to point out that this change has really taken place over the last 2 decades. And you can kind of see that. You can find this on the Department of Commerce website as well. So if you just take the last 10 years, we've gone from 14% renewables to 26%. And then coal has reduced from like 56 to 31%. And nuclear has stayed constant at 24%. So today we are at 50% carbon-free electricity. Still a long way to go to meet our governor's goal of 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050. What also helps us is that the 3 out of the 4 largest power utilities serving the state of Minnesota have their own goals in this direction as well. So Excel has a goal of 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050, and their integrated resource plan indicates that, or is in line with that. Great River Energy recently announced similar plans. And then this morning, Minnesota Power announced their plans of 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050. In terms of what is, let me actually get this in the full view mode, full screen mode, so that you can see a little bit better. So wind, as you pointed out, and thanks for putting that NREL wind map graphic, Mike. I was thinking about doing that, so that's great. So we have 19% wind, but really the 2005 and 2007 energy Next Generation Energy Acts during a Republican administration, Governor Pawlenty at that time, led to the exponential growth in wind in the southwestern and western part of the state. But now, after the 2013 Community Solar Garden program started, we see a big uptick in solar. And now this year, if you look at the queue in MISO for utility scale solar, it's off the charts. We have a few gigawatts of solar. So expect to see a lot of solar in time to come. We of course have to balance it with other priorities in the state, such as protecting prime farmland. So my team has issued guidelines on how to balance those. So exciting prospects. Hydro, we don't have a lot of our own hydro in the state, but Great Northern Transmission Line, which is a high voltage transmission line that went into operation last year, is helping utilities like Xcel and particularly Minnesota Power import a lot of hydro from Manitoba, which is helping their plans. Essentially, we would expect to see continued growth in wind, but even more solar and hydro in time to come. And it's really the key legislative initiatives here. It was the Next Generation Energy Act that set in place the renewable energy standard, which now we have already met. But it also established greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, right? Between 2005 to reducing it by 30% in 2025. So we met that in the power sector in 2019. We are already at 30% reduction, but the next target, 80% by 2050, that's going to be harder. In 2013, the legislature amended this particular statute, Next Generation Energy Act, to generate or procure 1.5% of their sales from solar by 2020. So the utilities have met that, and a large part of this is the community solar garden program. So we got 200 megawatts of community solar garden capacity installed in 2020, and a cumulative of 700. So we have had nearly a gigawatt of solar just through community solar garden. So this program is, I would say, in between a truly distributed solar, which would go on rooftops, residential rooftops or small commercial buildings, which can, run into tens or maybe hundreds of kilowatts, to, community solar garden can get into megawatts. So not really utility scale, but somewhere in between, I would say, truly distributed versus utility scale, but has had a large impact. Next Generation Energy Act also set some energy efficiency goals for investor-owned electric and gas utilities. So that was from the Pawlenty administration. And now Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan's One Minnesota Path, which is yet to be enacted in the legislature, but we feel that even with the current makeup, which is Democratic in House, Republican in the Senate, but our Senate Energy Chair, Senator Sanjum, is Republican and very pro clean energy. So we are excited that we have a new chair for our Senate Energy Committee. So, just like last session, we have 3 bills here on 100% carbon-free electricity sector by 2050. This date may be moved up in light of certain developments at the federal level and goals that may be coming up. Clean energy first and energy optimization. What I haven't mentioned here is we have 11 tribal nations in the state, and from an environmental justice and equity and increasing consumer choice perspective, there's also a legislation on formation of a tribal energy council that likely will be passed. In 2020, there was also a bill passed to award $46 million to the Prairie Island Indian community to help them go towards a net zero energy status. So they're going to do that through a combination of on-site generation and energy efficiency. So Tribal Energy Council will just help, take some of those best practices and spread them across other tribal nations. So those are some of the key really bipartisan legislative actions over the last 20 years that have made our progress possible. So thanks for the opportunity, and happy to answer any questions and look forward to further discussion.
Okay, great. Thanks, Aditya. Yeah, we're going to get to some audience questions, but before we do that, I have some questions of my own. I would encourage the audience, looks like we got over 75 people on, to start thinking about some questions you could populate into the Q&A in the Zoom chat. And I'll pick a bunch of questions. Our session goes till 1:45, so we don't have too much time really here, so I'm going to just jump right into it. My first question is for Maria, and I was just hoping you could explain some of the specific policies that separate Minnesota from Wisconsin and why they are important.
Well, I think so. Clearly, Minnesota has pushed forward a few acts and legislation that have been really helpful on moving the needle and creating that path forward, and getting bipartisan support. I think that's one thing that Wisconsin hasn't necessarily done, and that's what we're trying to do. I think our key legislation that like is our pride and joy is focus on energy, and that we had focus on energy established via legislation in 2007, and that program keeps evolving and keeps it's the #1 cost-effective program in the country. And so we have we can hang our hat on that program, but there's also so much more that we need to do that Minnesota has already done, and we can look to Minnesota as the model and that approach. So I would say that, you know, Minnesota, when you talk about the list of acts and policies that you've pulled together, you know, I just sit there and I'm like, we have so much work ahead of us. And so much that we need to define here in the state. We have similar resources that we could be looking at, but we need a lot more definition here in Wisconsin. And so I think, you know, one thing is reaching out to all of our agencies. It's one thing that and reaching out to our stakeholders and recognizing that there's a lot of subject matter expertise out there, and there's a lot of programs that we can leverage and build off of. And then it's just a matter of defining it the right way for Wisconsin. So I'm not sure if that totally answers your question on policy, but I think that we're trying to also, like, you see some different movement with the Public Service Commission, for example, opening exploratory dockets on parallel generation and EVs and things like that. So that looking for these avenues to gather more information, make informed decisions and inform policy based on stakeholder engagement and gathering information. So, you know, we're right at the very beginning of it, which I wish we were a lot further, but I think that, you know, in this budget session and this next legislative session, you'll probably see a lot more related to clean energy and a lot more push to get approval for programs and funding and all of the above.
Okay, great. Aditya, a bit of a follow-up on that. You know, we've talked a little bit about RPS, and but now we're seeing, you know, solar and wind to some extent are being brought by utilities to their public service commissions and being approved as a least cost resource. And I guess my question to you would be, you know, now that renewables are now cost competitive, you know, how has the role of policy changed, and what do you see in Minnesota as the role of policy? How is it evolving, and is the RPS still a relevant policy at this point, or how is it going to evolve over the coming years?
Yeah, it's a great question, because if you look at the integrated resource plans from, say, Xcel and Minnesota Power, they're already way ahead of our RPS. So our argument in and what we're advocating for on behalf of the administration is that we need to increase that renewable energy standard percentage. Right, we need to stay ahead of where the market is going to go automatically, and we're 5 years ahead. And so we're very much advocating for expanding that percentage. But one could argue that just given the cost, it may be irrelevant, right? Because we're far away from. So I think right now, what may be limitations in getting more renewables onto the grid is transmission, making sure our environmental review process is streamlined, and things of that nature, right? That are in more the regulatory domain and a regional domain rather than state-specific policy. So it's a glass half full, half empty, but different kinds of challenges than what can only be solved through a legislation.
Okay, I'm getting a bunch of questions coming in through the chat, so I'm gonna just hit on one or two more questions that I have here. I think there's a lot of excitement about Minnesota's Solar Gardens program, and you know, we're starting to see some kind of community solar type programs developed by the utilities, generally not bid out in a competitive environment. It's generally projects that the utilities will develop with their customers and then develop with a pre-selected developer. Aditya, could you talk a little bit more about community solar program and how it uses the competitive environment to drive down costs of solar for consumers? You're muted there, Aditya.
Sorry. So the Community Solar Garden program is an Excel Energy program, and Minnesota Solar Energy Industries Association has played an instrumental role, and they really lobbied for it in 2013. Part of it came from the Solar Rewards community working group, and so Solar Rewards program, also administered by Excel, it essentially it invites applications from residences and businesses, and we at the Department of Commerce have a say in what the rules for selection are for those projects going through a competitive process. I think the value of solar, which is a rate paid to the community solar gardens that creates these gardens through the competitive process, it makes them, it makes them competitive with respect to getting financing. And the Department of Commerce has had a significant input in how to determine that value of solar. So I would say the competitive process, determining the value that the CSG developers get from the utility, and having a transparent process in place has helped the program grow. There are, of course, challenges specifically with respect to the interconnection. So last year, the Utilities Commission passed an order with some upgrades to that interconnection, bringing it in line with the latest IEEE standards. So yeah, those are some positives and some areas where there's still more work to be done.
Okay, great. So we got about 9 more minutes here, so I'm going to go right to the audience questions. And if you guys want to, we'll have like a rapid fire around here. We'll see how many of these audience questions we could get through here. And I'm going to put this one to Maria, and then we could have do a follow-up. But this one comes from a Wisconsin-based consumer ratepayer advocate. What role should integrated resource planning play going forward, and how critical is it for accomplishments to date in Minnesota? So actually, I want to put that to Aditya first with Maria for follow-up. I'll read it one more time, Aditya. What role should integrated resource planning play going forward, and how critical is it for accomplishments to date in Minnesota?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical, and especially in the context of ensuring reasonable rates as well as decarbonization, right? So both are goals, and there are two different parts of my group that handle rates, integrated resource planning, and then another part that handles our renewables agenda. So what the integrated resource plan process helps us do is evaluate different combination of resources and scenarios, and we do take into account the social cost of carbon or externalities. So it helps us quantify. Not a blank check for renewables, but look at the financial benefits, look at also other areas like the extension on nuclear power plants, whether to build new gas or not. So all these decisions can be informed by evaluating these scenarios and the different resources against each other by taking into account the future cost, levelized cost, as well as external externalities costs, such as the social cost of carbon.
Okay, so Maria, as you know, Wisconsin once did have a IRP process, which was removed from the state statutes, what are the chances we're going to see IRPs being reintroduced through legislation, or what's your take on this front?
Well, I think we, it's one of the things that we're exploring as part of the clean energy planning process is there a way to get to where we want to go without having to establish the IRP process? Or is there more value to do that and help us define and look holistically at all the variables associated with the transition? So again, it's like we're at the front end of that, deciding like which is the best path, and is there already enough momentum happening? Like, what Aditya pointed out is like the utilities are already moving forward, and so with their carbon reduction goals. So like, is it more of a matter of us creating policy that helps deploy more clean energy versus kind of rewinding back and reanalyzing everything? Is there some pockets of opportunity where we can do the analysis and just move forward without establishing a new process? So the utilities are required to submit their plans through the strategic energy assessment process, and so are there ways that we can, at the Public Service Commission, so is there a way that we can kind of integrate some of the data that we need to make informed decisions and further inform our planning through that process, or through a different mechanism to be determined?
Great, thanks.
I was answering my own question.
And maybe if I can just make one more follow-on comment in favor of integrated resource plans, and is that when a utility presents that plan, stakeholders like Department of Commerce or environmental advocacy groups or labor or whoever, ratepayer advocates, right? We are a ratepayer advocate among other things, but pure ratepayer advocates such as citizens, a citizens utility board, right? They can all weigh in with the same set of assumptions and plans. In many instances, they also run very similar models that the utility runs through simulation software. And so everybody can speak from the same set of assumptions and facts. So it's a lengthy process. It takes time, it's painful, but I think it's really the best way to do it, to balance reasonable rates and good environmental outcomes and reliability.
Thanks. I'll see what I could do on that front with the legislature. Good, it's good talking points. So, quick one for Aditya. Wisconsin regulates munis and IOUs, but not co-ops. Does Minnesota regulate all electric utilities? Are any exempt from the 100% carbon-free by 2050 goal?
So as far as regulating rates, we do not regulate munis and co-ops. So, we have rate regulated utilities, they're the large investor owned utilities like Xcel, Minnesota Power, Otter Tail. So the others are not required to submit their integrated resource plans. Some still do on their own, like Great River Energy, which is a co-op of co-ops. But the 100% goal or bill as it's planned, it will be applied to all utilities. So although they may or may not be rate regulated, but they'll still be as envisioned, right? Of course, it's going to go through the legislature. The bill is going to go through changes. So, but as envisioned, it's going to apply to everyone.
Okay.
There are, of course, off ramps for grid reliability and rates. So if a utility can show that, hey, this is going to result in significant rate increases, they get more time to make that transition, right? So there are details here that I am not covering.
Sure. Yeah, if we had more time, we could dive in a little bit deeper, but we're running out of time quickly here. So this is actually, I'll go with this as the last question. I think it's a great way to end the session. And also remind you guys that there's the industry conversations taking place, I believe at, let me just confirm. I think it's 2 o'clock. Yeah, 2 o'clock today. So you could log in on the conference site and actually talk with colleagues and network. And I find that the networking has really been the most valuable part of the Renew Summit over the years. So I'd encourage you guys to check that out. So let me go to this final question here. I want to thank oh, go ahead, Maria.
I was just going to say, I actually am going to host one of those conversations on Thursday related to the clean energy plan. So if folks have heard, the conversations about the clean energy plan over the last couple of days and have thoughts, I would definitely love to hear those and have a conversation with a group of folks. So I just wanted to throw that out. That's on Thursday.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that was actually something I wanted to talk about today, but we just don't have enough time because Joel Brennan did mention the clean energy plan, and I was curious how that connected with the Climate Action Task Force and the report that just came out. And so, yeah, I'd be interested in learning more about that on Thursday. So last question here, just to wrap things up, and I'll direct this first to Maria. You both talked about the 2050 goals Wisconsin and Minnesota have. Climate scientists tell us how important this decade is to start drastically reducing our carbon emissions by 2030. What are the key actions Minnesota and Wisconsin need to take in these next 10 years to achieve these goals?
Well, I mean, the key thing that we need to do is reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. And we need to redirect our energy generation, transition, consumption to cleaner burning fuels and look to all sectors. So it's not just about, we have a goal for the electricity sector and power sector for 100% carbon-free electricity, but we really need to be looking at our buildings and our transportation sectors as well, agriculture, and looking at the opportunities to reduce carbon emissions in those sectors as well. So like as we approach the clean energy plan here in the state, we're looking at multi-sector, multi-resource, cross-sector, like all the opportunities that we have to reduce emissions. And I think the other thing is that, again, we're talking about, I always want to talk about environmental justice and climate justice, that recognizing that the impact of climate change aren't felt, the impacts of climate change and those adverse effects aren't felt equally across all communities. And so it intensifies with social inequities. And so we want to, in Wisconsin, make sure that we're looking at Indigenous low-income communities, communities of color that often bear the weight of climate change, flooding, like proximity to heavy emitters, floodplains, coastlines. So also thinking about geography when we're talking about our policy and deployment of renewables as well, or any clean energy or efficiency or anything like that. So I think honing in on impacted communities as well as looking across multiple sectors to deploy clean energy.
Okay, great. Aditya, last thoughts?
Yeah, so two thoughts here. I think electricity sector decarbonization can lay the foundation for subsequent decarbonization or in parallel decarbonization of transportation and industrial, right, by using more electricity instead of fossil fuels. But for that to happen, electric power sector needs to decarbonize faster, perhaps faster than 2050. So there is some academic studies out there. The Berkeley 90% by 2035 is a great example that indicate that maybe it's possible to do it faster than 2050 while still maintaining not increasing rates and maintaining grid reliability. So there's some appetite we have in the state for that. And you'll be hearing on that soon, hopefully next week, of what what that acceleration might be. But there's some discussion going on that 2050 is not hard and fast. Could be, especially in light with the new federal incoming administration and their goal of 2035. We may not be quite as aggressive, but you'll learn more. So that's the first step, and then the second step is what can be done for the harder to decarbonize sectors of the economy, such as a high process heat. So we're looking at, through our emerging energy technologies group, technologies such as hydrogen, renewable natural gas, other options, and even our commission is organizing a planning meeting on hydrogen this month yet. So yeah, I think those two areas, decarbonize the power sector more quickly, and then in parallel look at where electrification won't be an option or won't be an economic option, look at some other technologies.
All right, great. Well, Aditya, Maria, thank you so much for joining us for the panel discussion today. And I also wanted to thank our sponsor, Eagle Point Solar, for sponsoring this session. And if hopefully get to chat with everyone some more over the next few days in the chat room. So thanks a lot, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.